Welcome to the Public Accounts Committee, Monday the 10th of February 2025. Today's session is slightly unusual because it's in two parts. The first panel is with witnesses from the National Audit Office to discuss with them their estimates for the 25-26. And the second panel will be with witnesses from the Department for Culture, Media and Sport on their management of the COVID-19 loans. So the first business for today is to consider the National Audit's main estimate, which sets out its budget plans for the next year, for next financial year, 25-6. So today we have a very warm welcome to a regular appearer to this committee, but in a different capacity, to Gareth Davies, Comptroller and Auditor General, and Gareth, as we all know, has been CNAG at the NAO since 2019. Rebecca Sheeran, who is also a regular appearer at this committee, sometimes in a different capacity, but today as a witness, Chief Operating Officer, and Rebecca became COO in October 24, where previously she held the Value for Money service line. Welcome. And Max Che, Executive Director at NAO. Max joined the NAO in 2011 and has led the NAO's Value for Money audit of the Department for Work and Pensions and Digital Transformation of Government. So you're all very welcome, and thank you very much for coming this afternoon. We now start on questioning of that NAO audit for 25-6, and to help us with that, to start with, Lloyd Hutton, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to open on the 9% increase in the estimate for this current financial year. Could you just maybe outline in a bit more detail the reasoning for this increase? Is this because of what the NAO is setting out to do in the future and being more ambitious of that? Or actually is this just because of general financial pressures which are facing all public bodies at the moment?
Of course. My core role is to make sure that Parliament and the public gets high quality assurance on government's accounts, as you know, but also an insightful assessment of value for money and public spending. And there are three big risks that we're dealing with at the moment to our ability to do that. One is ensuring that our quality, particularly our financial audit quality, matches the best standards of the profession, which have ratcheted up very significantly in recent years after the various scandals in the audit world a few years ago. And we have been on a long journey to make sure that our quality is at least as good as the best of the private sector. And we've had to work very hard on that. In the last year, there's good evidence that we are closing that gap and, very encouragingly, achieving where we need to be on audit quality. But we still have more to do. So some of the cost here is an investment in completing that journey on audit quality. Secondly, we're keeping up with the growth in the number of public bodies that need auditing. And as we explain in the document, there are quite a lot of new bodies being created by the previous government and the new government, which adds up to a fairly significant increase in our workload. And so that's not a voluntary decision on our part. That's us doing the job that I'm required to do by statute. And not just more public bodies, but increasing complexity of the financial arrangements in lots of public bodies as well. And then the final one is making sure we remain a competitive employer of auditors and performance experts. All of our staff are highly marketable, and they're highly marketable in the private sector as well as the public sector. And so, a continual battle in running the NAO is making sure that our employment offer is sufficient to retain and recruit the talent that we need. And so we're always trying to strike a balance as a public body in doing that in a way that represents value for money for the taxpayer. So those three together have put this kind of cost pressure into our budget for next year. So better quality, more auditing, and a competitive offer to our staff.
And on those last 2 points, do you feel that the 9% estimate increase will help you to be able to do all of the additional auditing that is required of you, but also to be able to retain the staff needed to then do that successfully?
We have a really detailed bottom-up operational planning process involving our teams. So the information that's driven this is not a top-down set of guesses. It's detailed information about what it's taking to audit the organisations we're responsible for. And so I'm confident that with this budget we can come to Parliament proud of the quality that we're delivering in our audits, at least as good, if not better, than the private sector. That we're continuing to give you the insightful value for money reports that this committee is the main user of, and that our staff retention remains within the targets that we set for ourselves. And in the last year and a half, we have kept our staff turnover within the targets we set for ourselves, which is a big improvement on the situation of 2 or 3 years ago when we were seeing quite high levels of turnover to a booming private sector.
Thank you.
You happy? Clive Betts, please.
Yes. And you very often come here and advise us of the challenges which posed by the changing environment that all public sector organisations have to live with. So how are you adapting your strategy for the next 5 years compared with the previous 5 years to meet those challenges?
Well, we've, in fact, I've shared with committee members our new 5-year strategy that takes effect from April. If I could, I've just characterised the last 5 years was essentially about getting better at what we do. That's been our focus. Clearly, whilst we were doing that, we've had to contend with pretty extraordinary events like the COVID pandemic and the energy crisis and so on. But I think we have successfully improved the quality of what we do. The next strategy focuses more on, with that, what does a highly effective NAO allow us to achieve working with Parliament in the interest of taxpayers. So we've been more ambitious around productivity and resilience in public services are two big value for money themes, I think, for the next few years. Clearly, demands on public sector organisations keep going up, health demands, social demands, but the resources can't. So the only answer to that is productive and resilient public services. And there's a big theme in our new strategy about auditing in a way that encourages positive innovation in government rather than encourages risk-averse behaviour or avoiding innovative experiments and so on. So that's a very important area for us in the next few years. And then the other big chunk that we're more ambitious around, I think, is better financial management and reporting in government as well. The nuts and bolts of good financial management can never be taken for granted. We keep finding evidence of scope for significant improvement in that in our audit work. So we think that those are the foundations that will allow you to tackle productivity and resilience in a more successful way.
The big challenges there. How will we know as a committee whether you hit your objectives and your targets in delivering that change?
Well, I think there are some things that you should that are very measurable and important. So timely completed audits of government accounts, good quality results from our regulator. Our audits, as you know, are inspected by the same regulator as the big firms. So there are measurable things of whether we're doing our job well. But more, I think, in some ways, more interesting to all of us is what difference has all this made to the productivity and resilience of public services. So we are doing a lot of work to better measure the impact of our work in those areas. Of course, we can't be confident it's always our work that's made a difference in a particular area. But I think we are committing ourselves to take far more interest in what are the measures of public sector productivity telling us. Is there evidence that what we're doing is contributing positively to that? And if not, why not? Because if what we're doing isn't making a difference there, it's something we should challenge ourselves over. Either the topics we're selecting, the way we do our work, the way we communicate, the incentives on people in the system who could be doing more with their resources, but are not doing so. What is it that's getting in the way of our effectiveness? So I think we're just, by being more ambitious about outcomes, I think we're holding ourselves to a higher standard of results.
And in your future annual reports, we'll have a section on that so we can question you about whether this has really been delivered.
Yeah, yes, we will. And of course, there'll be big debates about attribution. So this may have improved, but was it anything to do with the NAO? Is a perfectly fair question. But without the data, you can't even start to have that discussion.
Thank you, Clive. Before I move on to Ms. Olney, I've always regarded the NAO as an exemplary organisation, superbly led by the CNAG yourself. So I was slightly surprised to read in your estimate in Part 2, page 15, paragraph 2.8, and if I can quote from that, fewer than half, 43% of our audit reviews by the Financial Reporting Council, FRC, met our target quality level, good or limited improvements, last year. That seems to be totally contradictory to what the impression I'd given. I'd thought of the NAO. And I have to just say in this, if I may, please, CNAG, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you and your organisation hugely for the help that you give this committee. You're unfailingly polite and straightforward, and your value for money reports are superb. So this question in no way is me as chair being critical of you, but I just wanted to get your reaction to that comment.
Oh, well, that's why it's been our top priority for 3 years, because, as I was saying at the start, the huge agenda for quality improvement in the audit industry over the last few years, driven by the regulator in response to the scandals in Carillion and other audited entities, has completely transformed the way these audits are done. It's also driven up the cost, as we've discussing at the start. But essentially a gap had opened up between the big four firms auditing the largest companies and the rest, including us, sadly, in the last 3 or 4 years. So we've had a quality first plan, which is our internal plan for learning quite how far the bar had moved on these things. And essentially here we're talking not about the kind of basics of auditing, but we're talking about the standard of evidence required on valuations, for example, the standard of evidence required on asset impairments. All of that has transformed in the last few years. And not only have we had to respond to that, but the bodies that we're auditing have had to respond to that as well, because we've had to explain to them what the new standards are, what that requires in documentation as part of the audit preparation of their accounts, and we've been on a big journey. So in the last 3 years, we've replaced our audit software platform with a brand new one. We've developed that ourselves with a technology partner, came in on budget and on time. We've just finished the first round of audits using that system on all of our audits very successfully. And it sets us up for using automated audit tools and AI tools in the future, which we've now started to do this year. So that's one area of big focus for us. Learning and development for our auditors. There's no point in having new tools if we haven't trained people how to use them. And so there's been a big focus on our new methodologies and a lot of learning for our teams to do. So this huge effort has been underway inside the NAO over that time. I'm pleased to say that the results of this the audits of the 23-24 audits, that programme of inspections by the FRC is coming to an end at the moment, so I can't give you the final results. But we already know that they are very significantly better than last year. So that 43% figure you quoted will be very significantly better in the year just that's soon be reporting. Now, you don't declare victory after one good set of results. There's a long way to keep going on this, and it's only after we've seen repeated results will we be confident about the progress we've made. But that's more in tune with my assessment. Obviously I see the inside of our audits, and I think that's a fair reflection of the effort that the teams have put in to improve things over the last few years. This is fundamental to us. That's why it's been top of our risk register for 3 or 4 years. It's essentially our license to operate, I think, to be so that you can completely rely, when you see an audited set of accounts from any public body, you completely rely on the accuracy of that audit.
So I'm sure that you will want to position yourself, you will want to benchmark yourself against not only the private sector, the best of the private sector is able to offer in this country using the same complicated rules, because the rules have got more complicated for them as it has for you, but also similar organisations with similar legal systems around the world. So how do you compare?
Well, we're quite unusual actually in doing the full range of financial statements audits that we do. Quite a lot of our equivalents in other organisations contract out all of their financial audit work to the private sector and don't do any. So we're not unique, and I think we think we are unique in being externally regulated by the same regulator as the private sector. And so if that's not right, I'll write to you to correct it. But we're very unusual in doing the range of audits we do and having the full degree of scrutiny from the private sector regulator. So I genuinely think, provided we maintain the level we've attained in the last 12 months, I think you can be confident that the NAO is the leading practitioner of financial statements audit in the public sector, in any of our equivalents. And so the Public Accounts Commission in recent years, the then chair of the commission used to say, is it really realistic to aim to match the standards of the Big Four? And I said, well, my answer was always, well, the audits we do require us to do that, because we audit the BBC and its group, we audit the Ministry of Defence and the Department of Health and Social Care. These are some of the largest, most important and complex sets of accounts in the country. And it's crucial that they're audited to the same standard as a FTSE 250 company. And I think that was the right answer. It's been very tough for our staff. You know, it's been a long slog to do that, and it will continue to be challenging, I think, for our people. But it's the right standard for us to aspire to, and I think realistic as well.
Thank you very much for those candid answers. Sarah Olney, please.
Thank you, Chair. There's a degree of uncertainty in some of your estimates because you've had to make assumptions. Firstly, as you've mentioned, there's going to be new audit responsibilities transferred to you, but also in the ones that you're doing already, there's a possibility of unexpected further work required. And you don't routinely include contingency for those additional costs. So can you tell us, when do you expect to have a greater degree of certainty around what some of those extra costs are going to look like?
Yes, I mean, we're getting more information all the time, obviously, about the creation of new bodies. More often we know they're coming. It's a question of which year will there be a first set of accounts that require audit. There's also the ones that already exist coming from the private sector inside the public sector boundary. By far the biggest group that we're working very closely on at the moment is the train operating companies, which are coming. They will become NAO audits over the next 2 or 3 years, and whether it's 2 or 3 is a really big piece of information for us because that is a very material. That's a bit like us taking on the BBC and its group as a new set of audits for us. And we're already in quite detailed conversation with the current auditors of those organisations on the timetable that government wants to see for the transfer over to us. But hence us building up our staffing now, even though some of those audits are 2 or 3 years away, we can't create an instant audit team from scratch. We have to build the layers of it over 2 or 3 years, and so we're starting now to do that. So that kind of information becomes clearer. In fact, even since we wrote this, it looks like the strong requirement on us is to take those rail audits on in 2 years rather than 3, which is quite a significant bit of information there. We still think this is the right figure for the coming year, but it will be a large exercise for us. The other information that we update all the time is our kind of risk assessments of individual audits and the level of complexity we're expecting. So is there a new financial instrument, for example, that will require a significant amount of audit effort? And that our resourcing system picks that up every month, essentially, as our teams update our risk assessments.
Given that some of these unknown costs are likely to be significant, what are the chances do you think that you may have to come back with a supplementary estimate?
At the moment we think this is the best we can estimate. So we're not doing this knowing full well we'll have to come back in later in the year. It is always a possibility though, and so we can never rule it out, obviously, and that's, I guess, what the process is for. Things that you couldn't have predicted at this time of the year, but become a requirement later. We have done it before, so I'm obviously prepared to go to Parliament for a supplementary estimate if absolutely necessary. But I do see it as my job to avoid that if I can as well. So for example, this year we've required every penny of our budget this year, the year that's about to end, and we did have a debate in the autumn about is this going to be enough? But we actually, with reprioritising a few things and cutting our cloth accordingly, with some 1 or 2 tricky decisions we had to make, we're very confident now that we can land this year within our estimate. So we'll do the same with this one.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sarah Olney. Clive Betts, please.
Don't you think that people who are employed in public service who are having lectures on productivity might look around and say, well, the NAO has given these lectures and next year they're taking on 58 extra staff. Shouldn't they be doing what they preach and actually getting more productivity out of existing staff?
Well, we are doing. So this isn't more staff to do the same work. This is more stuff because we are having to take on a higher workload, crucially. So the question is, what are we doing to improve our productivity, almost regardless of the volume of that work? And that's where the investment I was talking about in our IT capability is really important, because the way that audit work is developing in the industry generally, is it's going to reduce the level of junior level work in a typical audit in the future, because the automated tools that we are now starting to apply this year for the first time do take out some of that junior level time in reasonably manual tasks, agreeing a figure from the accounts to a supporting document. That can all be automated now in a way that hasn't been possible before. We reckon that just that one tool that I'm describing there speeds up that part of the audit 3 times, and so starting to take out appreciable amounts of time at the junior end of the skill mix. Now, it obviously takes time to work that through into our staffing requirements, but by the end of this 5-year strategy that we're discussing, I would expect our skill mix to look a bit different, actually, on the financial audit side, and to have a lower volume of resource at the junior end of the skill mix, because we're using more automation and more intelligent tools to deal with that part of the audit. And then our auditors will be using their professional judgment for the things that they're trained to do, and requires human judgment. So I think that's coming, and I think that will result in more productive audits in due course as well. But obviously that will take some time to work through.
Does that mean you've reached a maximum staff level now? You might start to see it stabilise or even go down a bit in the future?
Well, I mean, the one of the areas we haven't talked about yet, which is that it will mean headcount increase for us, but lower cost than would otherwise have been the case, is we're insourcing a degree of the work that we've previously outsourced to the firms. And this is particularly whole audits where there isn't a high level of specialised complexity. Because what we found is that the fees of the firms have now essentially priced themselves out of that work for us. And we know we can do that at the same level of quality, but more cost effectively. And I think we've estimated by next year, this kind of modest but meaningful amount of insourcing will save us about £1.5 million compared to the cost as if we hadn't done that. So that will require us to increase the headcount again to continue to insource that work, but spend less than we would have done if we'd have left that work in the private sector. So headcount is not. I'd rather measure cost actually as our productivity measure here rather than just headcount.
Thank you, Clive Betts. On these experts that you're now employing in-house, there must come a point where, even though they're experts in their own field, I mean, I know this as I'm a chartered surveyor, to which I declare an interest, if there was something so specialist that I knew that I couldn't deal with, I would then have to go and employ an outside specialist to help me on that particular area. Is that still a feature of your audit work?
Yes, I mean, and I might bring in my colleagues on this, but this is why we do relatively little of the in-house employment of specialists who aren't auditors. The areas we need this kind of advice are valuations, for example, surveyor expertise. We need actuarial advice from qualified actuaries, and we need financial instruments advice from people who are kind of professionally trained to value financial instruments. And we don't have in-house any of those teams ourselves yet. The case is growing for it because we're doing so much of that work now and paying so much to the specialist consultancies who do provide that advice to us, that this kind of make or buy decision that we've got for each of those specialist areas is getting more marginal now, and we're having to look quite closely at. But I am worried about the point you mentioned, which is you still have to buy in some level of expertise. I'm also worried about professional isolation. I wouldn't want to be the only actuary at the NAO, for example, because that the point about being a professional is you have peer review, you have learning from other people's workloads, and so on. And so we do have to. We need to be confident there's a pretty sizable critical mass of that work before it's worth us. Before it's a viable prospect for us to have our own in-house expertise.
In CNAG, there are plenty of sole trader surveyors or even actuaries, so they have their own professional ways of keeping up to date, I'm sure, CPD and so on. Yeah. It's in your estimate, so I'm not quoting anything that's sensitive, I hope. You are talking about a 3.5% pay award for your staff in the context of a competitive market and rationale for the increase in recruitment of graduates. It's always a tricky one, isn't it, pay increases? You obviously got to pay enough to be able to recruit the skills that you want, but on the other hand, you've got to maintain efficiency. So how have you arrived at that 3.5%?
We've used a lot of our benchmarking on turnover levels and pay levels with our competitors as well. There's a very relevant factor this year is that, as you can see from the timing of our estimate, we always have to estimate the pay award and agree the pay award earlier than the civil service does, for example. So last year, our pay award was 3% to our staff, and then a few months later, the civil service settled at 5% for the same year, which obviously caused a frisson in our organisation. And so we've borne that in mind when setting this year's. So our 3.5 has to be seen in the context of the 3 from last year, which was 6.5 over 2 years. Well, the civil service had 5 in 1 year, so I suspect we will still be behind the 2-year civil service increase. Pay pressure in the private sector is constantly there as well, and so we keep a very close eye on benchmark pay in the private sector. We think that the figure that we've included in the estimate is the minimum necessary to be responsibly looking after our turnover and making sure that we're not faced with a shortage of key people when we have such a big workload.
So this is an already agreed pay award for next year, is it?
No, it's our proposal. It's subject to approval by you and the Public Accounts Commission, but this is our recommendation based on the benchmarking that I was describing.
So the whole of your organisation, as with many other organisations, is dependent on the people you employ. So you're you have a trainee recruitment with ongoing campaigns for qualified and part qualified accountants, including those transferring from the private sector, as well as taking people and training them on from their academic studies. Is this does this secure your future pipeline of necessary skills?
Yes. Yeah. The intake last September was our largest ever, just over 100 graduates and school leavers, and we're looking for a similar volume in this intake. Clearly, we've got to make sure we obviously keep our quality standards very high for that recruitment process, and we are doing very well at the moment. At a time when actually the firms are reporting quite hard going in the graduate and school leaver market, and there's a general concern in the audit industry about the attractiveness of audit as a career. There used to be no shortage of graduates queuing up for jobs in the big firms. They're finding that more challenging now. I think we haven't found that, and it's partly because of the unique status of the NAO. I think that we can offer unique access to the audit of organisations that nobody else can, and that appeals to a sufficiently large number of high-quality graduates and school leavers. That means that we've always been able to fill our places, and this year we're doing well on our recruitment so far for next September. So far so good, but it's an absolutely crucial bit of our intake. As I said earlier on, we think the skill mix will be changing, and not just in numbers, but we think we're going to need to start recruiting larger numbers of data scientists alongside trainee auditors, given that a large part of our audit process will be data analytics. So I'm sure if we're having this discussion in a couple of years' time, I'll be talking about 2 streams of recruitment, with accountants still being the largest, but a very significant data scientist stream, which is already starting with us.
So on the discussion just now, we didn't actually put a number on it, on the amount you're spending on outside consultants. Mm. What do you expect that to reduce by?
So there's two large areas where we spend money on the audit firms. One is outsourcing whole audits, and that's the bit that we're reducing over the next 2 or 3 years. And it's that process that I said would deliver about £1.4 million worth of savings compared to what it would have cost if we carried on using them. 1.4 billion? Million,
yes, I was going to say.
No,
yes.
We're not that big.
Yes.
But, so that's that part. The other part where we've, again, seen cost pressure is the specialist advice that we have to buy. I was describing there the valuation advice and financial instruments advice. And because some of the audits we are auditing now require large amounts of that, for example, we audit specialist insurance entities like Pool Re and other organisations, and that requires significant amounts of specialist advice. The cost there has been going up, that's the area where we're looking at the make or buy decision. So would it be more cost effective for us to employ our own experts in this area rather than continue to pay these high fees to the private sector?
Thank you very much, CNAG. I'm going to give you a rest, and I suspect that one of your colleagues will answer this question. This is to do with the rental occupancy of your London office from 9 floors to 8 floors. And indeed, the whole balance, I can see you're lining up Rebecca Sheeran to answer this, the whole balance of your organisation between London and Newcastle, because you could subtract more out to Newcastle and let off more floors in London. So perhaps you could explain what's happening and the rationale for it.
Thank you. Perhaps I might start by explaining the current position in terms of how much of our London building is currently let out. So we've currently got 7 floors out of an available 11 let out this year. Our aim for next year is to have 8 floors rented out, which would represent some 41% of our total London office space. And our aim over the next 5 years is for us to have 11 floors let out, which would represent 58% of our office space. As you know, we changed the premises that we are renting in Newcastle in recent years, and we have some capacity there for us to take on more new recruits in Newcastle. So we've got the space to expand there a little without incurring any further cost.
Excellent. And do you expect the current downturn in the rental market for offices in London to have an effect on your ability to be able to let them out?
So to some extent it has already had a bit of an impact. Last year's estimate, we assumed that we would have 9 floors fully rented out, and we haven't managed to achieve that. Hence, we have been more prudent in the estimates that we've made for next year at 8 floors, which would be an improvement on our current position. Whilst the downturn probably has impacted us, we're also impacted by business rates being quite high in Westminster, which can have an impact for the type of sort of smaller organisations, charities that feel quite values aligned and would like to occupy some of our space. But we're not complacent. We're obviously trying to do what we can to make sure that we do make use of this space. So we have recently procured some new property agents who are coming in with some new energy there. We've updated our marketing materials, and in response to feedback from prospective tenants, we've also made some modest improvements in the building, including rebranding our reception space because we heard that would make it more attractive.
Thank you very much. I suspect, Sarah Olney, maybe that's where you're coming in on improvements to the offices.
Indeed it is. I just want to know if you can give us an update on the London office, the refurbishment. Is it proceeding as planned?
It is indeed proceeding as planned. We are refurbishing a floor at a time. We've just moved back into the first refurbished floor, which is part of the floor plate that the executive team sit on. So we have been leading by example, taking the disruption first there. And feedback from colleagues working in that space has been very positive indeed.
Thank you.
And we're on budget.
I was just going to ask. Thank you, Chair.
Well, I'm sure at some point during the year we will be visiting your offices, and so we shall look forward to seeing the results
We'd be
of that
delighted.
refurbishment. Max Chu, I mean, we've got to the end of almost all of our questioning, but your areas of responsibility, was there anything you particularly wanted to tell us?
Not particularly. I think in terms of value for money, we are projecting a fairly stable estimate for next year. We have been continuing to develop our expertise in our centres of expertise and hubs. So we now have a climate change and sustainability hub alongside the major projects, digital and other hubs like commercial and so on. We are very keen to support our wider strategy of pursuing productivity, resilience and financial management across government, and that will be a big focus of the work that we do over the next year. So we are looking at ways that we can do that in more effectively, bringing out good practice examples around innovation in particular. So those are the areas that we'll be focusing on.
And CNAG, you produced some very useful information for us the other day in our electricity cost to consumers, comparing a number of countries. Can we rest assured that you will be doing more of that in your value for money reports?
Yes. Yeah, we've certainly picked up the committee's interest in us doing more of that. We've been working on it ourselves. We're going to make more intensive use of the OECD data. Of course, always checking the data quality as we do that. Recently we used some OECD and spotted that the UK data had been submitted incorrectly. So we mustn't just take on face value some of these international comparisons without digging a little bit under the surface.
Was an incident in that hearing, the difference between the OIR table and the department's own table, I think. So that maybe illustrates what you're saying.
We're going to certainly bear data quality in mind, but absolutely. I mean, we have good relationships with our equivalents in other countries, particularly other developed nations with similar challenges around their public services. And so we're going to use those relationships to maximise the quality of the comparisons we can bring to you. And of course, it's not always easy, particularly in sensitive areas like defence and so on. But where we can, we'll make sure we maximise that evidence base that you have.
Thank you. Does any colleague have any more questions? So can I, before you go, thank all three of you, particularly Rebecca and Max, because you don't get the credit, but the CNAG does. But CNAG, seriously, we do thank you. Your work and support to this committee is absolutely invaluable. It really is, and it's of the highest quality, I always think. And the courtesy with which you answer our sometimes, I'm sure, not terribly intelligent questions is always legendary too. So thank you very, very much indeed. This isn't meant to be a critical session. It's hopefully meant to be a session where we were able to actually bring out what the really good work you do, and we look forward to sampling a lot more of that in the coming few months. Thank you very much indeed. Order. We're now going to clear the room because we're going to check